Life has a way of throwing unexpected twists at you, making things change in ways you never saw coming. To those who stayed in touch, I appreciate it, but there is never enough time to truly give back all the love you receive. Just like the seasons shift, so have I, and if anyone is wondering why, there is no mystery. Sometimes, time just runs out. I live what most would call an ordinary life. My name is Noah Wilson, and I am a 46-year-old man with a receding hairline, in decent shape, though I am carrying about 10 extra pounds. I do not have the sculpted physique of a fitness junkie, but I get by. I have always preferred contact lenses over glasses, and so far, I have not needed reading glasses yet, which I consider a small blessing. My wife, Agnes, is my age and has a figure that is on the fuller side, which is exactly how I like it. She is neither stunning nor unattractive, just a regular woman who insists on going by her full name. She has been wearing glasses for as long as I can remember and refuses to consider switching to contacts. We have a 22-year-old daughter named Ally. She is in her final year of college and has put on some weight since her days as a high school volleyball player. She is headstrong, opinionated, and vocal about women's rights, yet she still leans on us for support more than she realizes. I am the only one bringing in an income, and money has been tight. I never wanted her saddled with student loans, so she still lives at home. That does not mean Agnes and Ally are willing to give up life's little luxuries. While I drive around in an aging pickup truck, they both have high-end, comfortable cars. Our house, once a source of stability, has barely any equity left thanks to home equity loans they took out to maintain their lifestyle. We live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind with the occasional block party and friendly but distant neighbors. We do not have deep relationships with most people around us, except for the family next door. Their daughter, Gina, is Ally's closest friend, and because of that, we have more interaction with them than with anyone else. When Ally went off to college, I felt a strange emptiness creeping in. We had spent so much time together when she was younger, and now there was a hole in my life I could not seem to fill. Not even my volunteer work provided the same sense of purpose anymore. One evening, I tried bringing up the topic with Agnes, asking if she was happy. At first, she did not seem to understand what I meant, so I clarified. Was she happy with how life had turned out? She had been distant, and something about her felt different, as though a spark had gone out. I admitted that I missed the days when we spent time as a family. She assured me that everything was fine, that she had no complaints. Then she asked why I was suddenly bringing all this up. I told her I wanted her to be happy and that maybe talking to someone, like a counselor, could help bring some balance to her life. She was hesitant, but said she would think about it. I let it go for the night, but 2 weeks later, she started attending weekly sessions with a life coach. Some might assume that I expected this to reignite things in the bedroom, but that was not the case. Our routine had always been the same, twice a week, like clockwork. Was that normal? I had no idea. It was not something I ever discussed with anyone, and I had no interest in prying into other people's marriages. Elliot and Karen, the older couple living to the south of us, were in their 60s. Elliot was not particularly handy, and Karen had a habit of baking, which meant I had put on a few extra pounds over the years from all the treats she sent our way. One afternoon, while helping Elliot fix a sauna pump, I overheard them talking. Karen mentioned that our sliding patio door was making that annoying scratching sound again, and Elliot commented that unless Agnes was back from visiting her mother, it had to be Ally making the noise. Then he added that he had not seen me around much lately. Later, while sitting in the backyard gazebo, I overheard part of a conversation Ally was having. She mentioned that I was still home since my truck was in the driveway. What followed nearly made my heart stop. She told Agnes she needed to stop being so old-fashioned and should give some guy named Kai a chance. Apparently, Gina had said he was wild and could bring some excitement into her life. Ally even suggested that this might be exactly what Agnes needed to spice things up in the bedroom. My stomach turned. Was my wife discussing our sex life with our daughter? Ally continued, saying that since I was going on a hunting trip the following weekend, she would have Leo invite Kai over. She assured Agnes that he might be on the scrawny side, but he was interested in her. Then she laughed, mentioning that Gina had said he was just the right size for some fun. I was seeing red. My own daughter was setting up my wife with another man? She told Agnes she did not have to do anything, But since she had never tried something like this before, she should at least consider experimenting. I could feel my blood boiling. Agnes and Ally, my wife and daughter, were plotting to destroy my marriage right under my nose. What had I done to deserve this? Ally wrapped up the call with a casual, "Okay, well, let me know. Love you too. Bye-bye." I was shaking with anger. It was a wonder I did not end up injuring myself while struggling with that damn pump. The rest of the week at home was unbearable. I made it my mission to be as difficult as possible for both Agnes and Ally. I stayed out of their way, isolating myself in the garage or my office. I found myself obsessively sharpening and cleaning my power tools, just to keep my hands busy. Despite everything, I went on my hunting trip as planned, but I made sure someone was keeping an eye on the house for me. The photos I received on Saturday afternoon confirmed my worst fears. Ally, Leo, and some lanky guy showed up around noon. Ally and Leo left a couple of hours later, but the stranger did not leave until 4. When I returned home late Sunday, Agnes was oddly affectionate, but I wanted nothing to do with it. Nothing had been proven, but something about her felt off. She was sitting in an unusual position, shifting her weight like she was uncomfortable. Later, in the kitchen, Ally sealed their fate when she playfully slapped Agnes's backside, making them both giggle like schoolgirls before coughing to cover it up. I felt a weight pressing on my chest. Could I have picked something up from one of the guys on my trip? Just to be safe, I claimed I was having trouble breathing and told my boss I needed to see a doctor. He had no issue with me taking time off. My real plan was to fake a COVID diagnosis, something that would buy me time to put my exit strategy into motion. Between my sick leave and vacation days, I could keep up the act until Christmas Eve. A COVID diagnosis would keep everyone at a distance, giving me time to sort things out. Did I actually have it? No idea. I was fully vaccinated and felt fine, but my heart was shattered, and I needed to sever ties with all 4 of them. I checked into an extended stay hotel. No need to live like a pauper. Agnes sounded almost relieved when I told her I would be out of quarantine in time for Christmas Eve. She and Ally called twice a day, but I kept the conversations short, pretending to be too exhausted to talk. In reality, I was making my moves, changing my will, adjusting my beneficiaries, and updating emergency contacts. Finding a new place to live was tough, but it made things real. The divorce was happening. Ally would have to stand on her own. Anger brought dangerous ideas to mind, but I knew better than to act on them. Then, I saw a news report about a company that used escorts to expose unfaithful employees. That was when it hit me. I could use the same trick to set up Leo. It would hurt Ally, but in my eyes, she had already made her choice. She deserved it. The artificial Christmas tree stood in the corner, its red, white, and green lights blinking in a slow, rhythmic pattern. The scent of pine cones filled the air, giving the house the illusion of holiday warmth. The dining room table was set, just as it had been for over 2 decades. For more than 2 decades, this had been our tradition, Christmas Eve dinner as a family. The first couple of years were just Agnes and me, before Ally came along. This year, though, the celebration would take a different turn. Agnes had spent hours preparing the meal, and now, steaming plates of food sat before us. Normally, we would begin with a short prayer, giving thanks before digging in, but that was not happening tonight. I stood, ready to speak, but there would be no cheerful toast. Instead, I turned to Leo and casually asked him about Heather. His face drained of color almost instantly. Ally, sitting beside him, shifted her attention toward him, her expression filled with curiosity. The 2 of them had been together since high school, and it always seemed like they were destined to go the distance. But tonight would change everything. Leo barely managed to stammer out a response, claiming he had no idea who Heather was. I was not about to let him off that easy. I pressed him further, describing her. A striking woman with dark hair and lips painted deep red. I mentioned how he had been with her the previous Sunday night. Leo froze, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. His lips moved, but the words that came out had no weight, no conviction. He tried to deny everything, but the way his voice wavered told me he knew he was caught. That was when I pulled out my phone and hit play on an audio recording. A voice rang out through the speakers, unmistakable and clear. "Okay, Heather, you are amazing. Do not stop. God, I am coming again. I let the words hang in the air for a moment before stopping the recording. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. There was no denying it. Leo's voice was unmistakable. Ally erupted in fury. She turned on him, yelling accusations of betrayal, demanding he get out. But before he could even move, I was already standing behind him. I placed my hands firmly on his shoulders and forced him back into his chair. Agnes and I had to hold Ally back as she lunged forward, her face twisted with rage. I instructed Agnes to take our daughter into the other room and calm her down, telling them that Leo and I needed to have a private conversation. Agnes grabbed Ally and dragged her into the kitchen, though not without a fight. Ally's furious outbursts filled the house, every sentence laced with four-letter words. Leo and I sat in the dining room alone. It took only a few minutes to make things crystal clear to him. He was to warn Kai, keep him far away from me, or he would regret ever being born. Leo, now pale and shaken, understood exactly what that meant. There was no room for negotiation. A manila envelope slid across the table toward him, and Leo reluctantly nodded. He would do one last thing for me. I called out toward the kitchen, telling Agnes to bring Ally back into the room. When they returned, both of them looked distraught, their eyes red from crying. Now, it was time for them to hear the truth. I explained how I had obtained the recording. Leo, I said, her name is not Heather. In fact, I do not even know her real name. She is a high-end escort. And I need to add, she was hired. Ally's expression twisted in confusion. Hired? What do you mean? I took a sip of my drink, letting the weight of my next words settle in. I hired her, I admitted. Agnes made a faint, choked noise. Ally's gaze darted between me and her mother, her mind struggling to piece everything together. Both women were visibly shaken. Leo slowly stood from his chair, picked up the folder in front of him, and cleared his throat. I pulled out my phone and switched it to video mode. With a deep breath, Leo turned to Agnes and, with forced composure, uttered the words, "Agnes Wilson, you have been served." He handed her the envelope containing the divorce papers. For a moment, she simply stared at it, her fingers trembling. I was not sure if she was going to pass out or throw up. Maybe both. The scent of pine cones was no longer the most powerful thing in the room. The weight of what had just happened hung over everything. While Agnes and Ally locked themselves in the master bedroom to console each other, I stepped outside to oversee the final stages of my plan. Ally's car, her early graduation gift, was loaded onto a trailer and hauled away. Everything that had been inside it was left in a trash bag on the porch. Agnes's fancy Audi did not last much longer. The difference was, I had arranged for her belongings to be placed in an old, worn-out sedan, a fitting symbol of our 24 years together, nearly a quarter-century of marriage, now reduced to something that barely ran. My lawyer had reminded me that I was legally required to provide transportation for her, so this would have to do. All the credit cards had already been paid off and canceled. Ally's cards, ones I had co-signed for, were gone as well. I poured myself another shot of bourbon and finished it in one swallow. Cell phone service? Canceled. I had to give Agnes a basic phone with only limited talk and text. Ally received no such courtesy. They still had their expensive iPhones, but without service, they were nothing more than expensive paperweights. In the garage, I grabbed the for sale sign and hammered it into the front yard. Technically, I could not sell the house just yet. Agnes's name was still on the title, but I wanted her to understand exactly where things were headed. Instead of listening to the Christmas music playing from the speakers in the living room, I retreated to the basement. Sitting in the dark brought me more comfort than the artificial warmth of the holiday decorations upstairs. Above me, I could hear them moving around, slowly realizing what had happened. Their panic grew as they discovered that nothing they relied on was working anymore. I heard my name shouted, followed by a slew of insults. That was mild compared to the things I had screamed in my empty hotel room while planning all of this. Eventually, they figured out I was gone. Agnes and Ally tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had gone for a walk, they said. But then they noticed my truck was missing. That did not make sense to them, since my car was still parked in the driveway. Confused, they stepped outside, trying to piece it all together. That was their biggest mistake. While they were standing on the front porch, I locked the doors behind them. Now, they were outside, cut off from everything. No phones, no credit cards, no ID. They had left their purses inside, so even proving who they were would be a challenge. I had no remorse when I shredded their driver's licenses. Petty? Maybe. But I knew one thing. It was going to make their lives a lot harder. I poured another shot of bourbon and flipped on the television. Some cheesy holiday special was playing, filled with predictable warmth and happiness. Our situation could not have been further from the story on the screen. The quiet of the basement suited me better than the forced cheerfulness of Christmas Eve upstairs. Then, from outside, a loud shriek cut through the night. Ally had just realized what was in the trash bag. I took another sip of bourbon as her furious scream rang through the cold air. "Oh my God, this is everything I had in my car." Her voice was thick with disbelief, cracking with anger and shock. "Daddy got rid of my car." Agnes refused to accept what was happening. She kept telling herself that I would never do something like this, that it simply wasn't in my nature. But Ally was starting to see the truth. She suggested that maybe the reason Agnes's car was gone was because I had sold it. That idea infuriated Agnes. She loved that car, and the thought of losing it made her even angrier. Meanwhile, the doorbell rang constantly, making it difficult to catch every word of their conversation. Eventually, Agnes's frustration boiled over, and she started pounding on the door, yelling at me to open up, claiming it was freezing outside. I shouted back, letting her know that the keys to her new car were already in the ignition. That orange and green Impala sitting out front? That was her new ride. All of her belongings from the old car had been transferred over. I made sure to mention that the heater took a while to warm up, but that at least the gas tank was full. Then I suggested she go stay with Archie, her old flame, since he probably still had feelings for her. The reaction on the other side of the door was immediate. One of them gasped, and the other muttered something under her breath, realizing that I knew everything. Agnes made a weak attempt to keep the conversation going, begging for a chance to explain. When I didn't answer, she switched tactics, softening her voice, trying to coax some kind of response from me. She even threw in a "Merry Christmas," hoping that would get me to say something. But I was done. I told her to leave and take her companion with her. Minutes later, the old Impala sputtered to life. It sounded like it needed a new muffler, but that didn't surprise me. The guy who sold it had practically given it away just to get it off his hands. I had no intention of fixing it for her. That was her problem now. Without any more drama, they drove off. As I sat there, I thought about how long it had been since I had heard of someone dying from carbon monoxide poisoning due to a faulty muffler. Maybe I'd get lucky. Probably not. An hour later, my phone lit up with my father-in-law's number. We were never close, but we had tolerated each other over the years. I debated answering, but ultimately let it go to voicemail. His message was short. He had two very upset women at his house and wanted me to call him to explain what had happened. He even had the audacity to throw in a "Merry Christmas" at the end. I put my phone on mute, poured another glass of spiked eggnog, and finally let myself unwind. The adrenaline rush that had kept me going all night was beginning to fade. As I sat there, the blinking lights of the artificial Christmas tree cast a dull glow over the room. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep. When I woke up, the sun was shining, but the chill of Christmas morning still lingered in the air. The dining table was exactly as I had left it, the dishes from last night's dinner untouched. It didn't matter. The microwave did just fine reheating my cheesy potatoes and ham, which worked just as well for breakfast as it did for dinner. Gifts were still sitting under the tree, waiting to be opened, but they weren't for me. There had never been any for me, and I hadn't given any to them either. I hadn't even acknowledged the ones they had left for me. Instead, I spent the morning packing up the things that actually mattered, only the belongings I truly cared about. I left behind anything tied to them. Family photos? Scattered on the floor, unwanted. Just another mess they could deal with. It took Agnes a few days to track me down at my hotel. When I answered the door, I had only left the latch on, expecting yet another salesperson or some kid selling candy bars for a school fundraiser. Instead, there she was, pale, stripped of her usual makeup, her hair unstyled, looking like she had barely slept. She immediately started pleading, begging me not to close the door. I didn't shut it in her face, but I also didn't invite her in. She asked for a chance to explain, but I refused. She tried to argue that the neighbors didn't need to hear our business, that this conversation should be private. I didn't care. I made it clear that I wasn't interested in listening, and I sure as hell wasn't letting her in. She switched tactics, apologizing over and over, saying she couldn't explain her actions, but that she regretted everything. I asked her what exactly she was referring to, forcing her to say it out loud. She avoided answering directly, still trying to talk her way inside. Eventually, she admitted that she had been with Kai. I nearly laughed. It wasn't a surprise. I had already figured that out, but hearing her confirm it made it all the more pathetic. She asked if I had known all along, and I told her she had just confirmed what I had suspected. She was shaken, probably realizing that her last hope of salvaging this was slipping away. She tried to turn the conversation back around, suddenly desperate, asking if I had already hired a lawyer. When I told her I had, she panicked, saying we didn't need a divorce, that she would do anything to fix this. I asked her why she hadn't decided to do anything to save our marriage a month ago. The answer was obvious. She had never thought there would be consequences. She had believed she could do whatever she wanted, without repercussions, and that I would just go along with it. I pushed her to tell me when she would have come clean if I hadn't found out on my own. A day later? A week? How many others had there been? She swore that Kai had been the only one, that it was just one mistake, but it didn't matter anymore. She said one bad decision shouldn't end a marriage. I disagreed. Planning to cheat might have been forgivable. Actually doing it was not. Lying about it sealed her fate. But the worst part? She had involved Ally. That was something I would never forget. If she had just kept her private life to herself, our daughter never would have been dragged into this mess. Now, I wanted nothing to do with either of them. Some of the neighbors had come out onto their porches, watching the scene unfold. Agnes kept pleading, asking what she could do to make things right. She wanted me to tell her how to fix it. She couldn't. There was nothing left to save. I told her I was better off without her, that I was divorcing her and moving on with my life, whether it turned out for the better or not. This was my decision, and there was no changing it. She begged me to reconsider, to wait a few weeks and think it over. She tried to make it sound like it was just one meaningless afternoon, asking what she could do to convince me to stay. I told her to leave and never bother me again. Then I turned back toward the TV, letting her know that halftime was over and I had a game to watch. With that, I shut the door in her face. For a while, she knocked and pleaded, her voice breaking, but my noise-canceling headphones took care of that problem. I didn't know how long she stayed outside, but by the time I woke up in the morning, she was gone. 11 months later, I sat alone in my one-bedroom apartment, continuing my Christmas Eve tradition, but this time, by choice. I made my own meal. I had gotten the hang of cooking by then. People always say betrayal feels like a knife in the back, but that's not true. It crushes your heart, your ego, your confidence. But my self-respect? That was still intact. Not once did I second-guess my decision. I had been disposable to them, so I left. Case closed. After everything that had happened, I withdrew from social life completely, shutting myself off from the outside world. I became a recluse, and over time, my coworkers learned to keep their distance. I focused solely on my job, doing it well enough to avoid attention. Company parties were out of the question, and when friends attempted to set me up on dates, I turned them down one by one. Eventually, they stopped calling altogether. The cycle of self-pity felt endless, but I did what I could to distract myself. I took up running, and the presence of my earbuds acted as a deterrent for anyone considering approaching me. Between my new hobby and learning to cook for myself, I found myself in better shape than ever, to the point that my old clothes no longer fit. Strangely enough, I needed to put weight back on just to wear something comfortable again. Occasionally, a coworker would compliment my appearance, but nothing ever came of it, and I rarely cared. The divorce dragged on for 10 months, though the house sold quickly. Instead of monthly financial support, Agnes received a significant portion of the proceeds from the sale. That was fine with me. Anything to be done with her. Ally and Leo eventually went their separate ways, with Leo blaming me for setting him up with Heather. Like always, it was someone else's fault. He had been the one with her, not me. He had been the one who was weak, like so many men his age. A seductive woman could easily lead them astray, but in the end, they were the ones who made the choice. As for Ally, she left me angry voicemails, but I never returned her calls. Maybe someday I would, but I wouldn't bet on it. I wasn't invited to her graduation, and I certainly didn't attend. Agnes had it the hardest. She had not worked a full-time job since our marriage began, and suddenly, she had to learn how to support herself. My attorney prolonged the financial proceedings for as long as possible, stretching them out to ensure she struggled just as much as I had. Once the house finally sold, I paid back every cent I owed. The court ruled that she should have been receiving maintenance, but by the time everything was settled, she had already fallen into financial hardship. Her comfortable lifestyle was gone. Mine was too, but at least I had prepared for it. During the attorney meetings, Agnes tried to convince me that she had simply been foolish, that she had made a mistake and wished she could take it back. I stayed silent, offering nothing but a blank stare. She teared up more than once, but I didn't care. Hate is a powerful emotion, and despite everything, I couldn't seem to control mine. 13 months later, I continued the Christmas Eve tradition in my small apartment. This time, I wasn't alone. Laura, a friend who had gone through a similar situation, joined me. We weren't in a relationship, neither of us were ready for that. After dinner, we washed the dishes together before she led me to the center of the living room. With the lights dimmed and the quiet hum of soft music in the background, we danced. At times, I missed the warmth of a willing woman against me, but the feeling faded as the night went on. After about 10 songs, Laura wiped away a single tear, thanked me for the evening, and left. We were both too damaged to be anything more than what we were. Ally's tone in the voicemails she left had changed. She still called about once a month, but now, instead of anger, she sounded apologetic. I never returned her calls. My mother, during a casual conversation, accidentally let it slip that Agnes had moved in with someone new. I had expected to feel something, anger, resentment, jealousy, but the only thing that surfaced was indifference. At some point, I had stopped caring. Despite my continued struggles, I slowly started opening up to the world again. Small talk became easier, though former coworkers still avoided me. New ones found me odd, which made it difficult to make friends. The only exception was Laura, who remained a steady presence in my life. At the end of January, a letter arrived from Ally. I debated whether to open it, but curiosity won in the end. Inside was a short note and a single photo. The letter was simple, an apology, an acknowledgement that she had done me wrong. The picture was a selfie, and in it, she was visibly pregnant. She wrote that she hoped I could find it in my heart to include my future grandchild in my life. If I couldn't, she would understand. The return address was in a county several hours away, and there was no mention of a husband in the message. I sat with the letter for a long time, torn between resentment and the lingering desire to be a grandfather. I had always wanted grandchildren, but I wasn't sure if I could look past the past. It would take a few weeks before I finally decided to respond. In the meantime, Laura and I parted ways. Deep down, we both knew we had only been using each other for support, and neither of us wanted to hold the other back. She decided to move far away and start fresh. There was no grand farewell, just a few long hugs before she walked out of my life for good. To keep my mind from spiraling, I threw myself into something new. I took up pickleball at the local rec center. The sport was similar to tennis, but with different rules, and eventually, I found a group of players at my skill level. It reminded me of junior high, when everyone had to figure out where they fit in. During one game, I accidentally hit a woman named Nicole with the ball. Her friends laughed and teased her, suggesting that I should kiss it to make it better. Instead, I jokingly blew a few kisses her way, which got a few laughs. As we left the court, she asked if I wanted to buy her a drink, mentioning that she had noticed how quiet and reserved I was. We walked to a nearby smoothie shop and continued talking. She was the kind of person who could carry a conversation effortlessly, which was the opposite of me. Eventually, she asked if I was seeing anyone, and I admitted that I wasn't sure if I ever would again. She seemed surprised and asked about my past relationship. When I told her my wife had cheated on me and that I had never been able to move past it. She nodded in understanding. She had been through her own heartbreak. Nicole admitted that she had not been on a proper date since her own marriage had ended. She had people over for dinner from time to time, but it never went beyond that. When I asked when her marriage had ended, she told me it had been 27 months ago. She said it was sad, but I reassured her that it took time to regain confidence after being discarded for someone else. It had taken me years just to feel normal again. The conversation made my palms sweaty, and Nicole must have noticed because she quickly changed the subject. She mentioned that she had started playing pickleball to push herself out of self-pity, and I found myself admitting that it was the same for me. My friends had convinced me to give it a shot, and over time, I had come to enjoy it. Nicole agreed, saying she had gotten herself a paddle and that the game had helped her break out of her shell. Before we left, she mentioned that she would be playing again the next day at 4:30 p.m. and casually asked if I would be there. I told her I would. That night, for the first time in a long while, I felt good enough about myself to finally respond to Ally's letter. I wrote that I was willing to try. We would never be close, but I wanted to at least meet my grandchild. I made it clear that under no circumstances would I ever be in the same room as her mother. Judging from the photo, I estimated that the baby would arrive in June or July. I wasn't sure if Ally would even receive my letter, as I never got a response. The next day at pickleball, Nicole was noticeably more playful, and I found myself the center of a little more attention than usual. It felt good. After landing a particularly strong shot, Nicole smirked and told me that I looked really good in that shirt. For the first time in years, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, things were finally starting to change. The teasing from the women at pickleball escalated quickly, and I felt my face heating up as laughter echoed around me. Nicole was always confident, playful, and unafraid to stir things up. The other women joined in, giggling at her remarks, enjoying the moment as much as she was. The flirtation was lighthearted, and I knew I couldn't just let her comment slide. I turned it back on her, throwing the same compliment in her direction. That only made things worse, and soon, the group erupted into chants, their voices ringing through the air, encouraging us both to go even further. Playing along, I decided to push the joke further. Without hesitation, I pulled off my shirt, standing there as a few whistles filled the space. Nicole shook her head in exaggerated disapproval, wagging her finger at me, but her wide grin betrayed her amusement. As I slipped my shirt back on, she mouthed a playful insult in my direction, and in response, I blew her a teasing kiss. After the game, the light-hearted conversation continued. One of the women made a joke about how great everyone probably looked without their workout gear, which kept the laughter going. Nicole lingered, waiting for her turn to speak, and when the timing was right, she asked if I wanted to grab a drink. I had been planning to ask her the same thing, so it worked out perfectly. As we sat together, sipping on our drinks, she smirked, making another playful remark about my confidence. Her ability to turn any conversation into something fun made it easy to relax around her, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It took some effort, but I eventually worked up the courage to ask her out for dinner and a movie. Being out of the dating world for over 28 years left me feeling unsure of myself, awkward, and filled with self-doubt. At first, the nervousness made it difficult to act like my old self, but as the night went on, I slowly began to relax. My natural personality, the one that had been buried under years of betrayal and anger, started to resurface. Over time, our connection deepened. After several dates, Nicole invited me to stay the night. The moment felt significant, marking the first real step toward moving forward with my life. One evening, while lying together, she caught me off guard with a deeply personal question, asking who I thought about when we were together. I had to take a moment before responding. The truth was, I wasn't thinking about the past anymore. Instead, I told her what I had come to realize, that when I looked at her, it felt like looking in a mirror. She was someone who had been through pain, who had experienced betrayal, and yet had found a way to keep going. Our intimacy grew stronger, and the relationship became more than just companionship. Nicole eventually introduced me to her family, an experience that was uncomfortable at first. Her relatives were protective, clearly hesitant about accepting a new man into their lives. But as time passed, they began to warm up to me, and the initial tension slowly faded. By late July, Nicole and I were lying together in bed when she suggested celebrating how far we had come. As she curled up closer, the meaning behind her words became clear. The warmth and closeness between us deepened. But before things escalated, I found myself sharing something important. 4 days earlier, Ally had given birth to a baby girl. Nicole didn't say anything at first, but she held me a little tighter, offering silent support before passion overtook us again. That night, we made love for an extended period, letting everything else fade into the background. The next morning, I decided to acknowledge Ally's new motherhood in a small way. I sent flowers to congratulate her, unsure if she would respond or if I would ever hear from her again. A day later, an overnight letter arrived from Ally. The message inside was heartfelt, filled with sincere apologies and a deep longing to reconnect. She acknowledged the lessons I had tried to teach her, admitting regret for the pain she had caused. She also introduced her daughter, Caroline, and mentioned the possibility of us starting over as a family. Her words felt honest, but I wasn't sure how to process them. Nicole was the first person I shared the letter with. She read through it carefully before looking up at me, understanding in her eyes. She believed Ally's intentions were genuine and asked what I planned to do. I admitted my hesitation, worried about what reconnecting with Ally might mean for my relationship with Nicole. Instead of reacting with jealousy, she simply wrapped her arms around me and kissed me, reminding me that holding on to the past would only prevent us from moving forward. With her encouragement, I made my decision. Together, we drove to Ally's apartment, showing up at her door unexpectedly. She looked stunned when she saw me, frozen for a moment before the shock turned into something softer. When we hugged, it felt uncertain at first, but real. A small step toward something better. Inside, she introduced me to Caroline, and for the first time in decades, I held a newborn in my arms. Her tiny fingers, her impossibly small feet, everything about her reminded me of how fragile and precious life could be. Caroline didn't cry when I held her, which I took as a sign that maybe, just maybe, things were falling into place. Nicole, always the practical one, eventually asked Ally about her relationship status. Ally admitted that Caroline's father had never wanted to commit. Throughout the evening, there was still an undeniable distance between us, but something had shifted. Before we left, Nicole nudged me toward Ally, encouraging me to say what had been left unsaid. After a brief hesitation, I turned back and told Ally the truth. I still loved her. 5 months and a few weeks later, Christmas Eve arrived, and this time, the traditional dinner was held in my apartment. Nicole and Ally sat beside me, and Caroline rested in my arms. I gave the Christmas blessing, and for the first time in years, the weight of the past didn't press down on me. We dined together, exchanged gifts, and for a few hours, everything felt whole again. A family that had once fallen apart was now finding its way back together. That night, Nicole and I stayed at her house, marking a shift in our relationship. What had started as companionship had grown into something much deeper. 11 months later, Christmas Eve was celebrated at Nicole's home. Life had moved forward, and for the first time in years, I had finally found a sense of peace. The past no longer had control over me, and as I sat in the warmth of a home filled with love and acceptance, I realized that I was no longer trapped in the bitterness of what had been. I had let go, and in doing so, I had found true contentment in this new chapter of my life.